Mark, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to join Your Spirit Yourself. I cannot wait to get this thing started. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having us.
So you guys have a new book out. It is something that I'm very curious to talk about. It's called The Open Focus Life. Now, there's three authors, right? So Susan, I think, is that your husband, Les? Is that who that is?
Yes, my late husband, Les.
Your late husband, Les.
It describes his work and how he came about his findings. And then Mark joined us at a certain point, and we were all interested in describing it in everyday life.
Well, that's interesting. So Mark, how did you get a part of this team? What did that look like?
Well, it was accidental, actually. We shared a literary agent and he introduced us. So Les and Susan have published work before in academic journals, and Les had a co-author named Jim Robbins, and they published a couple of books about Les's open focus method before. But with this book, they were looking to do something a little bit more familiar to people. So they wanted to tell more stories. They wanted it to be less academic. And I'm a novelist by trade. And so our agents, our mutual agent, introduced us and said, would you be interested in writing this project? And so I read their other books and we had a meeting, and that actually started a very long journey for me. So I have the zeal of a convert, because when I first met Les and Susan, I was somewhat skeptical. I hadn't experienced their method. And, I was just taking it as a job, honestly. But then they invited me to Princeton, and I went through the training. And not only did I become a convert, but it changed my life. And so I was really happy to be able to work on this project with them and to be able to use whatever skills I had to tell stories to make what they do come alive for readers.
Susan, so Mark comes in. So how did you and Les come about with this modality, this concept?
Well, I met Les after he had developed it. I was a therapist in New York City doing traditional talk therapy, and I met and fell in love with Les. And my mother told me you should always express interest in the guy's interest that you want to encourage. So I learned about.
Can you repeat that? Can we just hey, ladies, listen to this.
Well, this was ancient. I'm 78, so I don't know that it holds anymore. But I was struck with what he had found, and it made logical sense to me. And I thought this would be interesting to learn. And I learned it over time. And I left New York and I joined Les in his practice. And what impressed me is that he came to his conclusions through science. It may be that his conclusions reflect all the great teachings in the world, but he didn't get there that way. And that appealed to me, that there was another way to come at consciousness and awareness. And so I learned about his work and began practicing with him. And that it's now become my work. Since he passed, I feel he handed me the baton, and I'm happy to run with it.
So Mark, why were you not a believer in this?
I'm a born skeptic. I was trained as a journalist, and the claims that Les made in his previous books were extraordinary. And so whenever someone makes an extraordinary claim about the most important thing in your life, which is how you pay attention and your conscious awareness, I don't have enough of a background in neuroscience to really evaluate Les's method on its own terms. And so I had to experience it. My skepticism, although I want to say that Les and Susan are so charming and charismatic when you meet them, and Les had such a great sense of humor. It was kind of disarming, and a lot of the skepticism that I had fell away because of who he was. And I think that's because he was living out his theories. he was actually practicing and living in the open focus life. And that's when you see someone who's very grounded and centered and who does not have a lot of anxiety, who meets you in a genuine way, who's very authentic, that's very persuasive. And so that was my first entree, was just to meet them. And then when I went through the training, so now I'm an open focus coach. They certified me, and I see clients myself. And it became persuasive. It became so persuasive that I wanted to share it with others. And the reason why I was persuaded is because it immediately, like once I got it, it took a couple of years to get it actually, but once I got it, it changed everything for me. It changed my day-to-day life and made me calmer and more present to my relationships. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to participate in this book, because I thought, well, I wasn't getting it right away. But maybe other people are less skeptical, or maybe other people could hear it in a story or in a way that I could maybe tell that it wouldn't take them so long to get these benefits.
I think that was what made Mark's contribution so wonderful, because the writings up till then had been pretty technical and academic and somewhat boring. And Mark had a great way of couching this system in stories about everyday life. And I think, I always tell you that, Mark, that was so compelling to me. How do you're online in the grocery store and you have to get home, and you go on the express line and you have 8 items because the limit is 10. And there are 2 people ahead of you, and the one right in front of you has 12 items, and the one right in front of him forgot her checkbook. And you're feeling like you're going to pull your hair out because you promised you'd be home on time. What do you do? And, and he portrays this everyday experience and then tells you what to do in the moment. And that's what I love most about the book, that he brought to life principles that could sound very academic.
So this concept of awareness, consciousness, right? Like we were talking about it a little bit before the interview, where you kind of, my perception of it is you're expanding the lens, right? Like you're going in like from that narrow focus of consciousness and expanding that to the whole, right? To feel everything here. I feel like it's so funny because I just stumbled upon this concept not too long ago, and now I'm having a conversation with you guys, which is pretty amazing in itself. That awareness, that consciousness, like when I can feel it in the moment, and I don't know if you felt this, Mark, for yourself. It's like this happiness kind of thing. It's like a really, I don't know if your heart center at all does anything for you. Like I know for myself that when I do that, I feel a very deep pull in my heart chakra, right? Like in that area of vibration. And I feel like, and I haven't read the books. I don't know if you guys talk about these concepts, but like I feel connected to everything. Is that right on? Is that not like what it's about? Like, feel free to chime in on like what it is that are these some of the key concepts? Are these written in the book at all? Like,
yes, that what Les's work uncovered over time, and we can tell the story if you would like, is that when the brain begins to produce whole head synchronous alpha, and synchrony is when brain waves peak and trough at the same time. And when it's in the alpha range, which is a mid-range when we're relaxed and alert, when we begin to produce this alpha synchrony, the feelings of separateness melt away and oneness becomes the most important experience. And the journey of open focus was, how did he figure this out? And it was a lot of trial and error. And the first step on the journey was discovering that you can't try to make it happen. You have to allow it to happen. Well, we don't know how to do that. We're triers and doers, and we narrow focus and we're effortful. And he had to, by his own failure, finally figure he couldn't do it and give up. And it was at that moment that his brain started to produce these nice big synchronous brain waves. And the conclusion of his work is when you pay attention in a way that moves you from a narrow objective attention to a more diffuse and immersed attention through space, opening up to space and then immersing it, you begin to produce this synchronous activity, which gives you oneness. When you are narrow and objective, you're producing asynchronous brainwaves, which are important for us. We need to do that, but it creates a kind of separateness. So learning how to change your attentional style so you can be in a oneness when you want to, or be separate and evaluative when you want to. I liked it because it came at it from a scientific way. And I don't know that I feel heart-centered. Maybe you do, Mark. I just feel a sense of ease. And I'm a sort of OCD kind of person and a bit compulsive. And I did everything with a kind of perfectionism. And it's been a great relief to discover that the same things can be done even better when I'm in this state of not trying. And so it came out of neurofeedback, observing brainwaves, and then mapping the consequent feelings that come with each state of attention. Mark, do you feel that heart-centeredness that Trey is talking about?
I do, although not all the time. And I would like to say that Les has, so there are a series of audio exercises that he guides you through. And one of them is heart-centered open focus, which begins with the heart. It begins with you're imaginatively feeling the space around your heart and then extending that throughout your body and then throughout the space that you're in. And it has the effect of connecting your heart, or the thing that you imagine as your heart, your feeling self, to the space around you. And once you're connected to that, and I don't know, Trey, if this is what you meant by that, but once you're connected to your heart and that feeling center, you can be open with your heart to the spaces around you, which means the people that occupy those spaces as well. So yeah, to answer your question, Susan, there are moments when I do occupy that space and it feels very open and even loving and accepting, which doesn't mean that like anybody walks into my space, I necessarily immediately gel with, but I can listen to them in a different way and hear them in a different way with that feeling center instead of evaluating them all the time.
Yes, yeah. You have a sense of oneness with them.
Yes.
I get some of the like, I don't know, like the deeper I go into meditations, or the deeper that I feel the awareness or into that awareness, to a point you can't really describe it. Like it's ineffable, right? Like I think each person's experience, which is very important. I think instead of I don't know where you guys are at in your journey, right? Like we're all on our different paths and our different journeys. And, the one thing that's always been frustrating to me is like, I just want to know, like, I want to feel that. I want to know that all the oneness that you hear the mystics talk about, the source that a lot of the teachers have talked about. Like, I just want to have that. I don't want to believe anymore, right? Like the belief is, I'm good with that, right? Like, okay, I can believe you on like a lot of the science and the quantum physics to talk about, quantum theory and everything like that, the 0 point field and everything like that. Like that's fine. I just want to have the experiences, right? And I think that the Open Focus Life, right, the book, kind of starts you down that path of experience, of feeling what it's baby stepping, right, into feeling that experience, having that experience with the oneness, the awareness of consciousness, and then having your brain states change, right? And I'm a big believer in, once you start changing like the neuroplasticity of your brain, you start doing new things, you're rewiring your brain, you access different levels of consciousness. And the more levels of consciousness that you access, that's when the experiences start to come in. That's when you start having deeper meditations. That's when you start having these downloads that are pulled from wherever you want to call it, source, the universe, the cosmos, whatever, on insights on where you're at in your journey. What, the one mind, whatever you want to call it. I just feel like this book has the science, right? That people who may be skeptics, who may say, all right, this is, I don't want it to be woo-hoo, but this has the science. It supports a lot of the research, and it can kind of baby step them into that direction. What are your thoughts?
I think the first problem is you can't try too hard, which is, as I said before. So what do? How do you allow it to happen? And that's where space comes in, and that's a very important part of it. And I think that it's the right questions to ask. We all come at it at various stages of development. I was the most backward, I think, that I was sort of hard-nosed, and it took me a while, and the exercises were helpful. And gradually I was able, with feedback, to learn how to do it. But you can't, as you say, you can't grab it. You can't say, oh, that's the way to do it. And when you do that, you crash the trip. We also work with a lot of meditators who come to us from various disciplines. And a common story we hear is somebody will come in and say, I've been practicing this form of meditation, and all my friends are getting great results, and I'm just not getting anything. And we teach them a little open focus. We look at their brain waves, and we discover that they're in this narrow, objective, trying too hard state, and they're not producing any of the brain waves associated with letting go or not trying or oneness. And we train them a little, and then they go back to whatever their form of meditation is. And
well, so I just want to follow, the genius of Les's discoveries is that when you're talking about opening up to space, or that oneness, it's just a fact that everything's connected, right? I mean, like we see, it's just physics. Like the space that you're in is connected to the space that we're in, which is connected to all the atoms till the end of the cosmos. But that's a hard thing to conceptualize, and it's a hard thing to stay in. It's, to get to open your awareness to the fact that the room that you're in is connected to infinity. It's that whatever matter there is all unified. But to me, that was a bunch of abstract, esoteric words. The genius of the Les's method is that he connects you to that immediately by thinking about the space that you're in. So the space, so we can just do a little exercise right now. So if anybody's watching this, I don't know, is this a video podcast or is it just audio?
It's both. Yeah.
It's both. So if anybody's watching this, so normally when you see a screen, your attention focuses very narrowly on the screen. That's actually how it's designed to work. But if you're looking at a computer or a tablet right now and you're seeing us, you can also see the edges of the tablet, and you can see the room. If you're I'm looking out a window now behind my computer. So I see my neighbor's yard, and I see the yard behind that, and I see the mountains beyond that. In my visual space is 70 or 80 miles of just actual space that is filled with atoms and particles. And so I can look at all that. I can see the Sandia Mountains in the background, and I can focus on your face, Trey, and yours, Susan. Like all of it is it's available to me right now at all times. That visual information is coming into my eyeballs, it's coming into my consciousness, and paying attention to that does not mean that I don't pay attention to you or what I'm saying. It just means that if I can stay open to that, I'm grounded in all of the experiences that are already happening to me that I'm filtering out when I choose to pay attention in a very narrow way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do, when you, like you said, you're certified in this, right? Like, so what are some of the main concerns that people come to you when they first start this modality? Like, do they have a hard time pointing to that? Like, what do they say?
Well, I should probably defer to Susan because she has decades more experience than I do, but I will say that the people who come to me are mainly anxious. They have incredible anxiety, and they lose themselves in the anxiety. So I had a woman, they changed bosses at her work, and the new boss, she'd been there for 20 years and she worked at a big box store. And so it's not the greatest job in the world, but she had made her peace with it and she enjoyed it and she enjoyed her colleagues. And this new guy came in and was all about efficiency. And so they kept butting heads. He kept wanting her to do things his way. And so she would get lost in the anxiety about their relationship. So her question was, well, how do I'm going to be anxious about this. He's not going to go away. I can't really afford to quit my job. I've talked to him. I don't know what to, like we can't reach a détente. Like we're not agreeing on things. How can I not lose my mind with anxiety? How can I go to sleep at night and, actually just enjoy the job in the way that I did before? And one of the ways that happens is by paying attention differently. Nobody teaches you how to pay attention, except in a very narrow way, right? Like your teacher says, well, when your teacher says pay attention, you're already paying attention to something that's interesting to you, just not what interests them. But this is the only way that we learn how to pay attention, is just like only pay attention to that thing right in front of you that somebody else wants you to pay attention to, or you get lost in the screen. You can get lost in enjoyable things too, but nobody tells you how to open up and widen out. And like that thing you were talking about being that experience of oneness. Well, there's a way of learning how to pay attention in that way, so that even very unpleasant experiences, like having a conversation with your boss who's telling you to do something you don't want to do, I mean, it was not going to be pleasant, but it won't be anxiety provoking, and you don't have to lose yourself in it. Like you can experience that anxiety. The way you pay attention to the anxiety and with open focus is different from the way we've all learned to pay attention, which is just to lose ourselves in it.
Sure.
With open focus, the anxiety becomes a very small part of your overall experience. You're grounded in the space that you're in. You're taking in all of the physical elements, like all of the 5 sensory elements of the space that you're in, and it makes that anxiety smaller. It makes it something that exists alongside all of the other things that you're feeling, including the joys and the happiness that you might feel with your other colleagues. And this is sort of a thumbnail, like I haven't really told you how to do it, but it's just that his method, like the way he teaches you how to pay attention, opens you up, it expands you, and it allows you to be with those other people who might be annoying you in a different way, so that you can go home and sleep at night. You can leave that thing there. You can have a more positive experience with those people, even in the moment.
Mm. Well, even identifying this as positive.
In our practice, Les was doing this for a long time, so people have heard of him. And we get a lot of people, as Mark said, with underlying anxiety. They may call it being stressed out or apprehension or impatience or nervousness, but it's an activation of arousal that creates the kind of anxiety. And then people with pain, a lot of people just with physical pain or even emotional pain, a certain number of people interested in peak performance. There's a lot of evidence that this works very well in athletics and in performance arts. And so some people come to us for that purpose. So it's a general thing, or some people have read one of his books and want to come. But talking about, what's funny, Mark, I'm thinking Les listening to this, he'd be laughing at how he's being deified by the two of us. He would find that very funny. But what's so nice is anybody can learn. And all these words, as much as we need to talk about it, language is the booby prize. You don't get very far understanding it. And it's such a simple process that I always worry that talking about it in this complicated way is going to make it seem like a bigger deal than it is.
Mm. So who, like, hearing you two talk about Les, like who was his, you talk about he took a lot of teachings from ancient traditions, right? Like which one had the biggest influence on him?
No, I mean, it was the opposite. He had just gotten his PhD at UCLA, and then he did his postdoc at the Brain Research Institute. And he did some experiments that showed him that the brain works best when there's a lot of this synchronous activity. And so he decided to try to train himself. There was no neurofeedback at this time. It was the late 60s. And so he built himself a piece of equipment, and he was going to train himself to produce these nice, slow, rhythmic waves. And he thought he would have a pretty easy time of it because he knew lots of psychological techniques, relaxation techniques, guided imagery, hypnotic inductions. And he could not produce any alpha. He spent 12 two-hour sessions over several weeks trying to produce alpha, and he couldn't. And at the end, he was forced to conclude, either it can't be done or I can't do it. And he felt very despondent because he thought this was going to be his life's work. He was going to prove that you could not only know what brainwaves you're producing, but learn to control them. And in that moment of despair, he just gave up. And you might guess what happened to his nice, slow, synchronous waves. It went up. And then he became a professor at a state university of New York at Stony Brook, and he used student subjects as subjects. And it was the late 60s. People were very interested in consciousness. And so he had a lot of people who wanted to ride Fehmi's machine. And he found the same thing was true of them. Even though he had told them what had worked for him, people could not, one after another, could not produce alpha. And it was by sheer luck he came across an induction technique that was used as hypnotic induction technique that had 2 questions on it. And when those 2 questions were asked of all subjects, it increased these nice slow waves. And the 2 questions involved opening up to space. And so that was the first doorway into understanding the value of space. And then understanding that if you want to take in space, you have to open up, because space is everywhere and runs through everything. And if you want to really grok it or really feel it in an intimate way, you have to get immersed in it. So it was his awareness that opening up and immersing, well, who opens up and immerses? The attender, the person who's paying attention, that there is a behavior called how you pay attention, and it's under voluntary control. And when you attend in certain ways, you produce brain waves, which reflect the nervous system, which runs all the peripheral systems and determines how we feel in this world. So that's how we got to it. The fact that people tell him all the time, oh, I went to India and met this guru, and he says he teaches about space, but not until you really perfected it. Or, gee, now I'm able to go back and do my mindfulness, or whatever it is. It didn't come out of any of the great traditions, although it lines up perfectly with these great traditions.
Yeah, a lot of them talk about that, especially like from India and the gurus over there. Like they talk about awareness. They talk about like the everything and nothingness. Like that is the awareness, the I am, right?
Yeah.
I always say, who was it that said, I can't remember his name now. I think, therefore I am. I've switched.
Was that Descartes, Mark?
Yeah, Descartes. Yeah.
Descartes, right? Like, so I switch it around now. So I just say, I am, therefore I think.
And feel and see and hear. And yeah.
Well, it's funny, try the book. There's all these, niche lists on Amazon, and this book debuted at #1 in religion and philosophy, which is funny because it contains no religion and no philosophy. So I don't know what algorithm they're working with, but that was one of the things that appealed to me as well about this method, was that I was a seeker. I tried everything. I grew up in the Methodist Church. My father was the minister of my church. He was also a criminal. So I got a very bad model of what Christianity is supposed to be. Wow. And so I went on this journey where I knew, I tried all the different, I tried as well, there's so many denominations of Christianity, but I tried a bunch of different ones. And then I tried Islam, and I tried Taoism, and I mean, you name it.
Mhm.
And I don't think I'm unusual. Like once you're seeking, like you try things on to see how they fit. And I never really found anything that worked. I mean, yoga came pretty close, and I've done various modalities of meditation. And that's what astonished me about, yes, you're right. It's a hagiography of Les Fehmi. That's the thing that astonished me about Les's method, was that it got me to the place I was trying to go with these like meditative techniques and religious philosophies without including any of them. It was just my body. It was just how I paid attention.
Well, how did it develop you though, right? Like you said, you were seeking, right? And then now you found this technique, this modality. How did it close the gap? Like from that question to like that experience?
What I want to tell you a story, actually, because I'm not sure I could answer. I'm not sure I could. I'm still not sure I know. But here's what happened when I first got it. I was supposed to make dinner for a dinner party, and I was going to make something with eggplant, and I got all the ingredients, and I forgot the eggplant. So I rush over to the grocery store. You know, it's like I'm on the clock, and they're coming over, and I have all this anxiety, and it's around the time that everyone is there after work, and so there's a lot of lines. And I was just walking into the vegetable section of my supermarket, and I'd been doing open focus because we had just started working on the book, and so I was doing these exercises all the time, and I just realized, oh, this is exactly the kind of time when I should be opening myself up, and not consumed by my little ego, my little problem. And so I had that thought, and then I immediately forgot it. And then the next thing that happened was the real key, which is that somehow the work that I had been doing with open focus caused this thing to happen. I was no longer like a stressed out guy looking for an eggplant. Suddenly, I was the whole store, everything. There was a guy yelling at a cashier, and there's a woman who just dropped a can of beans, and like all of it was happening. I was participating in it, and I was no longer the ego of my experience. I was just an awareness that was simultaneously experiencing all these things. And the weird thing about that to me, Trey, this is I think where it clicked, was that I was still walking through this store. Some part of me was still willing my body to go get an eggplant. I didn't lose myself entirely, but I lost that separateness of myself and everyone else. And I just was everyone else. And so somehow I still had this instrument of my body that had to go get the eggplant and make dinner. Now, I didn't forget all of that. It wasn't like a total annihilation, the way I had always thought it would happen with Buddhist meditation or something. It was something simpler than that, but also more grounding. I was that can of beans, and I was that person dropping the can of beans, and I was just the whole thing, because it was just all available to me. And once I let myself have the experience that I was actually already having, instead of concentrating on my little self, I suddenly experienced that oneness that you were talking about.
I came at it from a very different perspective. I was raised by Jewish atheists, and that's a very specific kind of person, and they're very dogmatic. And I was a therapist in New York, and one of my clients was very interested in Eastern religion. I kind of rolled my eyes a little, and but I liked her very much. And I said, "What book would you recommend that I read so that I understand better what you're doing?" And she recommended Ram Dass's Grist for the Mill. And I read it, and it was a Sunday afternoon in an unremarkable setting in my own living room. It was very sunny, nothing unusual was going on. And I'm reading about this foreign idea, and I'm saying, I could believe that. I could believe that. So then I thought I really should go on searching. And I went to, like you, Mark, I went to all the disciplines I could think of, but always this tape of, oh, come on. Religion is just designed to control us. And this is what people do when they're too scared and they want some nice, easy solution. And I just couldn't get rid of these tapes. And then I met Les, and I did what I did more for as a therapeutic tool. But I began to change, and I began to feel like I transformed. I still can't look at it directly, and if I talk about it, I still want to roll my eyes. But I have these transformative experiences of oneness and love and being a part of all, and compassion, and all the things that we aim to have. But if I label it, I lose it.
Mm. It's like God, right? You can't label God, like that word for God.
Yeah.
Like, if God is this infinite source, this infinite potentiality, how can you even put a name like God on it?
Yeah.
Because what are
You're
you doing?
making an object of God.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you talk, Trey, on this podcast about Christ consciousness and God, how that messes people up, because how can you take the place of God, or how can you have the pride, I guess, to think that way? And it really does mess with you until you let your ego go. And if you're just participating in God, like everything is, then you're not in place of God. You just are, everything just is God.
Yeah.
I don't know, I may have gotten us in trouble, Susan. I
Don't
know,
roll your eyes.
So could I ask you a question, Trey?
Absolutely.
When we were talking a little before we started recording, and you were talking about that oneness that we've kind of touched on here and there. Have you found, so you tried, like you're getting the oneness. Do you drop, or I don't know, do you drop in and out of it? Is it awareness that you can stay in? Like, how did you find that oneness in the first place?
So have you ever heard of Paul Selig?
Mm-hmm.
Paul has written a book, and I was interviewing him in a previous podcast, and he starts talking about Jesus coming out. The second coming of Jesus is not the physical coming of Jesus. It's the rolling back of the heart, Jesus coming through the heart and being present in man. And I didn't know what that was. I was just, okay, softening the heart, loving everyone, but I've still had that duality mindset, right? Like it wasn't non-dual, it was duality, like me, Jesus, me, God. And then in his other book, he's like, it's like breadcrumbs, each one of his books. And it was also Suzanne Giesman, who's a medium. They kind of hit it at the same week. I was reading their books, and in Paul's new book, he talks about we are the word. I am the word. I am that. And I started piecing it together. And then Suzanne said, "You're not the ocean. You're not the wave. You are the ocean waving." And then like it had to be divine timing, because like, I know, Susan, don't roll your eyes. But it was like those two concepts made it click for me, and that I'm that source of consciousness, but I'm also this personality, and the ego is something that is just like a mechanical mindset that I have in this brain, like this new prefrontal cortex, the eye, the small eye. And then like when that is gone, like you're talking about that awareness. So when I am Trey, I am that wave, but when I am aware, I am the ocean, and I'm not separate. I am both, if that makes sense. And when that clicked, then I started experiencing that Christ consciousness. And I'm not all the time, right? I still get lost. But when I practice meditations like what you guys are talking about in your book, I can hold on to it a little bit longer. Like I can hold on to it throughout the day. And I can kind of, like when you're talking about, Mark, where you kind of sit back and you kind of, like when you're feeling that anxiety, like I can kind of look at it and just say it's happening inside of me. It's not me. Like I am not the body. I am just here, this awareness. This is the vessel. This is where the experience of life is happening. But I can kind of sit back and see the stress and just kind of look at it and honor it and just say it's happening, and then let it go. Where before I would hold on to that and say, that is me, right? That is me. Like that stress is Trey. And now I don't look at it like that. I don't identify with that. identify with the awareness that is the I, the big I in consciousness. But Trey is just having this experience, and together, that is where the universe gets all of that, all that good stuff. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, for me, we talk about the way you pay attention, and we've been trained to be narrow focused and somewhat distant from our experience. We come out of the womb and we're undifferentiated. And part of our early development is figuring out what's me and what's mommy's breast, what's me and what's the light. So our early development is a lot of narrow focus, evaluating of things so that we can get a sense of who we are. And then we get rewarded by teachers and parents who like it when we look like this. Mm-hmm. And then, it's very effective. You can be a high performer in this narrow focus, but it keeps you separate and apart and is very stressful. So I think that we would say the narrow focus is what gets us into trouble. And as soon as you begin to change your attention to be more open, that larger self, that non-ego self, that non-dual self is just a natural byproduct, even if you don't have words to describe it. And I was interested, Mark, why did you ask Trey if he's able to hold on to it or how long he can experience it?
Well, I was just going to steal his techniques. So for me, practicing open focus it's a daily practice. Like like you, Trey, I just get lost in, the everyday experience. And the more, as you said, the more you do it, the easier it is to remain open and to have your experience be a small part of your attention. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love to think about, especially when we're doing interviews like this, is how little control we actually have over the things that we think we control. And this was one of the fun things to me about going to Princeton and getting hooked up to the lesson Susan's neurofeedback machines, and just seeing the way my body and my brain were reacting to how I was paying attention. Because so even now, so I'm talking, but I'm not planning what I'm just it's kind of happening, right? I haven't planned out what I'm going to say. So there's some part of me that's producing this language, and I'm kind of hearing it at the same time you are. Like, I don't know, so I have an intention about it. It's clearly coming out of me, but it's not as if I'm very carefully planning it. And I'm also breathing. I have all of the autonomic nervous system functions are happening below my level of consciousness. They're happening without me. I'm attending to my environment, but the sense inputs, my brain's just doing that for me. And all of these things that we think we have control over, are just not most of our experience is something that we're not controlling. And getting hooked up to those neurofeedback machines, like the way I was paying attention, the way I was looking at things, the way I was thinking about my surroundings, it just turns out to be wrong. It was very narrow and very, I don't want to say narcissistic or anything, but I was just occupying myself and not allowing anything else in. And when you get hooked up to these machines, you can do it without the machines, and hopefully our book will, show you ways to do that. But the machines just provide this data. It just provides feedback to show you how that's an ineffective way of paying attention, and how when you open up, you see the alpha waves happening, like you see the brain waves changing, and then you feel differently, and then you start interacting with people differently. And so my relationships with people changed, and that was the most persuasive thing to me, was that I was more open to everyone, which meant that I could feel more like I was having a more emotional feeling relationship with the people around me.
Yeah. Did it affect your writing? Do you write differently as a result?
That's a good question.
You have to read the book and find out.
I have to read my next book and see if it's better. It's not. I'm not as anxious about. I don't think it changes anything at a sentence level, or I don't think it's a tonal thing. But I think perhaps I represent things differently.
Mhm.
Perhaps I'm telling different kinds of stories. I don't know.
Mark, do you ever
think
do you
about
ever write something and like look back at it and say who wrote that? Like, you ever get in those states like where you're getting into the flow states and you're just going with it, and then you sit back and you look at it and you say, wow, did those words really come out of me?
Oh, absolutely. If I'm doing it right. Yeah. Yeah. It's that's that participation in. So somehow, if you hit a deep enough well, so you can tell stories that aren't really connecting to anything. And so I'm sorry, I'll personalize it. I can tell stories that aren't connecting real. They're just that idea I have. It's some cleverness or something that I'm, just like, I don't know. I want to put these characters through the paces and show you something. That always is terrible. Any idea I have is terrible. What's great is to somehow be given a framework, like to be given an idea, like you observe something or you don't understand something and you have to investigate it. The way I investigate it is through stories. And so when I hit something that I genuinely don't understand, and it's genuinely not being directed by me as something that I want to entertain you with, but it's just an investigation, that's when those things happen. And if I'm doing it right, then it bubbles up out of a well of, I don't know, it's the collective unconscious. It's like somehow, it's the story that's given to you. And then hopefully if it connects to something larger in the culture, readers will experience that. Like, I don't know if you've had the experience of, you can tell when something's dead on the page or something's live on the page, and when it's really touching you and really urgent and visceral. And then you read things that are just kind of like, they're dull and you see that it's clever and good or whatever, but it doesn't touch you. And to me, that's that experience that you're talking about from the other side. It's hit something really deep. And I don't know if I could do that every time, I'd just do it. But it's a real mystery.
I think it's improving on that. I think there's such a deep well that we can't even fathom. Like, I think we are just scratching at that surface. I think a lot of the mystics talked about it. I think a lot of the ancient traditions obviously is lost in translation through generations, but I think there is something to that. And I think the more that you practice it, the more that you get into that awareness, the deeper that you can go. I think it's just like you just don't know where it's going to end,
I was never more grateful for it when Les, who died at the end of June, and he was home in hospice, and it was a sublime experience. We were together in this space, very conscious, and it was. I don't know how I would have handled it otherwise. I would have seen it as with great grief and been inconsolable. And instead, I felt like a oneness with him and a love for him that I still feel today. I don't know what to make of it, but I treasure it for that reason. You can imagine, because it's been very recent.
Well, is he really gone, right? Like, is it?
Yeah, right,
Like,
right.
I mean, just because we can't see it, right?
That's right. That's right.
It's
Yes.
funny because like I didn't say this, but I was watching something and it was like, if you turn the camera around on yourself and you like reduce yourself all the way down, like, to the face, to the skin, to the cells, to the atoms, to the photons, eventually you disappear. Everything disappears and it's all one. And then it's nothing. It comes from one place. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But
I was once in a workshop where they gave out 5 pieces of paper to each of the participants, and they said, write down 5 different definitions of yourself: student, wife, daughter. And then everybody had done it. And then they said, okay, everyone throw out one of them. And we all did that. Then throw out the next one. And I thought, I figured out what's going on, that when the one that's left is the one that should be most important to you. So we all had one left, and then they said, throw that one out. It was like, bong, it was nothing to hold on to.
I loved every second of this, you two. I can't thank you guys enough for coming on. How can we find the new book? How can people reach out to you?
Our website is openfocus.com, and my email is Susan@openfocus. And the books are, I think, everywhere. They're on all the major sites and in all the bookstores. Am I missing something, Mark?
I would just repeat the name of the book. It's called The Open Focus Life. And it's practices to develop attention and awareness. And the idea behind the book is just to give you a tool for optimal well-being, to just like let you experience what we've been talking about, that openness to space, which makes you open to your relationships. And yeah, so the Open Focus Life, you can find it wherever books are sold.
Can't thank you two enough for joining the show. This has been awesome. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Trey. It was great. I really appreciate being on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.